I am a 17 male, and when I was just 5 years old, something really sad happened. My dad died. After that, it was just me and my mom, like a tiny team taking on the whole world. My mom was amazing. She worked like a superhero, day in and day out, doing whatever she could so we could have food on the table, a roof over our heads, and so I could go to school and learn lots of cool stuff. We didn't have a big fancy house. It was just a small apartment that we rented, and life was pretty tough. But I didn't mind because I had my mom, and she was doing everything possible to make sure I had a good life. She was out there working every single day, showing me that if you want to make something of yourself, you can't just sit around. You've got to get up and do something about it. I took that lesson to heart. I hit the books hard because I knew I wanted a good job someday, not just for me, but so I could help my mom out too. We weren't rolling in money, but we were okay, and a lot of that was thanks to my mom teaching me to work hard and stand on my own 2 feet. I'm super thankful for everything she's done for me. Plus, I'm pretty good at school and even play football, which should help me get into a good college. But then things took a bit of a weird turn. I recently found out I'm going to be a big brother, and the reason is my stepdad. A few months back, my mom married this guy she met on a dating app. She had dated people before, but it never got super serious. My mom and my stepdad had been seeing each other in secret for a bit before they decided to get married. Just a couple of weeks before my mom's big wedding day, she decides to sit me down for a chat. Totally out of the blue, she tells me she's been using dating apps. Yeah, I know, right. My mom, on dating apps. I was super shocked because honestly, the thought never even crossed my mind. But she laid it all out for me, saying now that I'm grown up, she feels it's time for her to jump back into the dating scene. She was pretty clear about not wanting to stay single forever, which when you think about it is pretty cool of her. I totally got where she was coming from, and believe it or not, I was kind of excited about the whole thing. The idea of having a dad figure around sounded nice. I had met the guy who would become my stepdad a couple of times before they tied the knot, and he seemed like a genuinely nice guy. Fast forward a bit and they're married. We're moving into this big fancy house, and my mom decides to quit her job to focus on running the household. Everything seemed pretty sweet at first, and my stepdad was as nice as ever, but then bam, everything changed. It hadn't even been a full 2 weeks since the wedding when the first big blow-up happened. I was just chilling, probably not paying enough attention, and I ended up spilling some soup on the couch. Bad timing, because my stepdad walks in right at that moment. And man, did he lose it. He started yelling like crazy, calling me careless and irresponsible. But it didn't stop there. He went way overboard, saying I didn't even deserve to live in the house and that my mom and I should go back to the sewer we came from because we had no class. Can you believe that? Everything changed so fast. One moment we're this happy little family moving into our dream home, and the next, I'm getting screamed at for making a simple mistake. It was like a switch flipped with him, and suddenly the nice guy act was gone and we were seeing who he really was for the first time. So you've got to understand, my mom is this superhero, right? She's out there, day in and day out, working her butt off to make sure we've got food on the table, clothes on our backs, and a roof over our heads. It's not easy for her, not by a long shot, but she never lets us see her sweat. That's why it felt like a punch in the gut when my stepdad and I had this massive blowout. It all started over something silly, as these things usually do. But when I tried to defend myself, my stepdad just lost it. He went from 0 to 100 real quick, shouting and getting all red in the face. He even threatened to kick me out. Can you believe that? And there's my mom, caught in the middle of this storm, tears streaming down her face as she's begging him to just chill out and drop it. But nope, he wasn't having any of it. It was like talking to a brick wall. This whole showdown with my stepdad wasn't just a one-time deal. Oh no, it was like the opening act in a drama that just kept on giving. I quickly caught on that trying to argue back was like pouring gasoline on a fire. It only made things explode bigger and louder. So I made this pact with myself to just zip it, let him have his tantrum, and hope that by not feeding the flames, they'd die out faster. Wishful thinking, right? But the thing is, my stepdad could find a reason to get ticked off at the drop of a hat. It could be something tiny, like me leaving a cup out, and suddenly it's World War III in our house. He'd start with his usual rant about my attitude and how my mom supposedly dropped the ball with me. It always ended with him painting this picture of me being one step away from being thrown out on my ear. Talk about a broken record. After a while, I got pretty good at tuning him out. It was like I had this mental mute button. He'd start up and I just press it and go to my happy place. That strategy got a real workout recently. I was feeling under the weather and decided to play hooky from school to prep for an upcoming test. Just my luck, my stepdad was also home, playing hooky from work. So there we were, the whole family, stuck together in the house, just waiting for the next round of the shouting match to ding. So there I was, just chilling in my room with my books spread all around me, trying to get some studying done. It was one of those quiet afternoons where you could hear a pin drop. That is, until the peace was shattered by this crazy loud yelling coming from downstairs. It was so loud I thought, no way I can ignore this. So I put my study stuff aside, curious and a bit worried about what was going down. Making my way downstairs, it felt like walking into a scene from a movie, except this was real life, and it was happening in my house. The first thing I noticed, my stepdad, and let me tell you, he was not having a good day. He was in the shower, but that didn't stop him from contributing to the noise. His voice was echoing off the walls, and it was clear he was super mad. Meanwhile, my mom was in the kitchen, looking like she was in the middle of a kitchen nightmare, with what seemed like 1,000 pieces of a bowl or something similar scattered all over the floor. It looked like a ceramic explosion had just gone off. From the sounds of it, my stepdad was blaming my mom for something, really laying into her about how marrying her was a mistake because she and I were always causing trouble or breaking stuff. It was harsh. My mom, bless her, was trying to clean up the mess while silently crying. She was doing her best to hold it together, but I could see the tears, and it just broke my heart. Enough was enough. I couldn't just stand by and watch this go down. So I stepped in and told my stepdad he needed to cool it. There was no way I was going to let him talk to my mom like she was nothing. You should have seen his face when I spoke up. It was like I had pressed the pause button on him for a second, but then he hit play and started directing all that anger towards me. But here's the thing, I wasn't about to back down. Not this time. I've seen too many of these shouting matches go down, and I was done playing the quiet kid who just watches. So I matched his volume and told him he was out of line. He got even madder, if you can believe it. He threw out this threat about kicking me out of the house for being disrespectful, but I was so over it. I basically told him, yeah, right, if you were going to do that, you would have done it by now. We were both so heated you could almost see the air around us shimmering with anger. The tension was through the roof. I could see in his eyes he was struggling, really fighting with himself not to take this from a shouting match to something way worse. It was like watching someone trying to hold back a storm. Seriously intense. Things got really heated between me and my stepdad. We were arguing big time, the kind of argument where you can't even remember how it started. But it just keeps going and going. Suddenly my mom steps in. You'd think she'd take my side, right? Because, well, she's my mom. But nope, she tells me to cut it out and march right back to my room. I was boiling with anger at this point. I mean, here's my mom, who's always been this strong, independent person, and it felt like she was just letting my stepdad push us around. It didn't sit right with me at all. A little while later she comes into my room. And guess what she says? She tells me I need to apologize to him. Yeah, as if I was the one in the wrong here. I was totally taken aback. How could she think it was okay for him to freak out over the smallest things and I'm the one who needs to say sorry? I couldn't help but remind her of all the ridiculous things he's blown up over. Like, there was this one time I spilled some milk by accident and he lost it. Or when I'd stay up a bit late to get some extra studying done and he'd act like I was throwing a wild party. Or even making myself a quick lunch when no one else was around. I mean, come on, really. It was like walking on eggshells around him. And it's not like I was the only target. He'd get on my mom's case over the smallest stuff too. I just couldn't wrap my head around why she was expecting me to just roll over and take it. Like, was I supposed to just sit back and let him treat me badly? And not just me, but her too. I finally had enough and told her straight up that I couldn't live like this anymore. It was pretty clear he didn't want me around, considering he'd threatened to kick me out at the drop of a hat. It was a mess, and I was just done with trying to pretend everything was okay. Me and my mom got into a pretty big fight. After arguing for a bit, she suddenly got really angry and told me I had to zip it and be nice to my stepdad. She said he's the reason we're living so well now. Then she just walked away. That hit me hard. I felt like my mom wasn't the mom I grew up with. It seemed like she was letting my stepdad boss her around just because he's the one paying for everything. I was super upset because it felt like she was choosing him over me and not standing up for herself or me. And to make things worse, I had a big test the next day, but I was just too upset to study or do anything. I ended up just lying in bed crying for a long time. When dinner time came, my mom knocked on my door to call me to eat, but I didn't answer. She didn't try again after that. I don't know how long I was in my room, but about half an hour before midnight, I finally stopped crying. I decided I had to get out of there. My grandparents, my dad's parents, live not too far from my school. I've always known they've let me stay with them because they've told me that my whole life. So, I made up my mind to leave and live with my grandparents because I just couldn't handle living with my stepdad anymore. So I wasn't too worried about showing up so late unannounced. When I was younger, my mother would often drop me off at my grandparents' place if she had to work late, or she just wanted to hang out with friends. Even when I was old enough to stay home by myself, I would just go to my grandparents' place if I ever felt lonely whenever my mom wasn't home. Their house was basically my second home anyway. But yes, in the middle of the night that day, I decided to run away. I packed some clothes, my books, and my toiletries in a duffel bag, and snuck out of the house as silently as I could. Then I walked all the way from our house to my grandparents' place with my stuff. By the time I reached there, I was panting like crazy, but I somehow managed to ring the doorbell. I had to wait for around 15 minutes before my grandpa opened the door. I'd probably woken them up from their sleep, but I had bigger things on my mind right then. I went in, and within minutes my grandparents were wide awake and making sure that I was all right. They heated some soup for me since I was starving, and it was kind of cold outside. Then finally, after around half an hour of them fussing over me and my well-being, we got to the reason why I'd shown up their doorstep in the middle of the night with all my things. I told them about everything my stepfather had been putting me through, and how he'd threatened to kick me out over the smallest failings while my mom said nothing. And then I told them about what had happened that day itself, which was the last straw for me. I couldn't accept the fact that my own mother was telling me not to stand up for myself and was in fact forcing me to live with a man who didn't have even an ounce of respect for either of us. This was what compelled me to run away, and I told them that I was hoping I could live with them for a while. My grandmother had tears in her eyes. My grandpa was red in the face. By the time I finished telling them what had happened, they told me that I could live with them for as long as I wanted to, and they'd be more than happy to let me stay. My grandpa was fuming and ranting about how ungrateful my mother was being, and suddenly he said something that caught my attention. I just had to ask him about it. He said that he wasn't sending anything to my mother anymore after what he'd just heard. I was obviously very confused since I didn't need to know, but my grandpa told me that. Now that I was almost an adult, I was old enough to know what he was talking about. So in spite of my grandma's protestations, he told me something that completely changed my perception of my mother. Apparently, my mother really wasn't as independent as I thought she was. My grandparents had been consistently sending her hundreds and hundreds of dollars every month over the years after my father passed away. Since they felt responsible for her and wanted to take care of her, so they'd sent her a decent amount of money every month to take care of us. Of course, it wasn't a huge amount, but it was enough for us to get by when it was combined with my mother's salary. And that was the first shocker for me, since I'd always assumed that my mother earned enough to pay for everything that we had, and that she was completely independent. She never mentioned that she had help. More recently, a couple of months before my mother got married, my grandpa's business really took off. My grandparents run a bakery nearby, and while they were always moderately popular, I made a decent amount of money. They'd taken off in recent times after a famous food blogger had posted about their cupcakes. That's when their business blew up. And it's been going pretty great so far. So much so that they're even thinking about branching out. Anyway, once they started earning almost triple the amount that they were previously, my mother asked them to help her pay for the house that she was planning to purchase with my stepdad. She told my grandparents that he was ready to pay for half of it, and she needed help to pay for the other half. My grandparents readily agreed since money wasn't an issue anymore. And like always, they did it to provide for us like my dad would have had he still been alive. After my grandpa told me all of this, I didn't even know how to react. My entire life I believed that my mother had built her life from scratch all on her own, and she'd never once addressed all the help that she'd had. I'm not saying it takes away from her independence, but she's the one who used to tell me that I should never rely on anyone for money or help, not even her. Now, all those life lessons mean a lot less to me than they did earlier. She was my inspiration, but now I'm not so sure anymore, since whatever my grandpa told me, coupled with her strange pushover behavior around my stepdad, has made me question everything so much so that I couldn't even focus on the test the next day. And that earned me my first baby. All of this happened a couple of days ago, while my grandpa and mother had been fighting on call regarding where I could be staying every day. Now I'm just confused as to how I should feel about my mom now. She's been texting me every day ever since I left, begging for me to come back, and that she'll speak to my stepdad and make things better for me now. The thing is, I hate to be the one to say this about my own mother, but I have a nagging suspicion that she's saying this just because my grandpa told her that he's going to stop sending her money now. I don't know what's real anymore, and I'm freaking out because I love my mother, but it's just hard to see her in the same way now that I know what I know. Honestly, I just want to be sure I'm not crazy for taking this to my heart. So I stay for not wanting to go back to living with my mother after she let my stepdad mistreat me and lied to me about having no financial help. Now for the update, don't forget to subscribe. It really helps my channel. Update 1. I posted the last update 3 days ago and it's been almost a week since I moved to my grandparents' house. I didn't respond to my mother's texts or calls after I learned that my grandparents had been helping her out all along, as I was majorly confused regarding my feelings about this new piece of information. But she didn't stop texting me and kept trying to convince me to come back. When I still didn't respond, she decided to come visit me instead. Yesterday she came over in the evening and it was really awkward for us to meet each other after almost a week of no contact from my end. And moreover, both of us now knew the truth about all the money and stuff, so it was just plain weird. My grandparents seemed very uneasy and stiff as well, after asking me how I'd been and how was school. My mother asked my grandparents if she could speak to me alone. They weren't that happy about it, but they agreed. And my mother and I headed up to my room once she was sure that we were out of earshot. She became all panicked and jittery and told me that I needed to move back in with her right now. She seemed like a different person after she dropped the pretense of looking calm and composed, and I could sense that something was wrong. I explained to her that I absolutely detested my stepdad and couldn't possibly live under the same roof as him anymore, and she needed to respect that. I also told her that I was hurt and disappointed by the fact that she'd been lying to me all my life about how she'd never had anyone to support her when it came to money, and that I wouldn't have thought any less of her had she been truthful about all the help that she'd received from my grandparents. She apologized to me and told me that she'd always wanted me to see her as a hard-working and independent woman, and she was afraid that admitting to the fact that she used to take money from her in-laws would make me think of her as weak. Then she told me that while she'd married my stepdad, believing him to be a good man, he'd proven that he wasn't, but she'd already quit her job now and was completely relying on him for money. Her own savings were almost down to zero after she bought the house and furniture, and she desperately needed the money, which is why she was putting up with her husband's behavior. And after that, she told me something that explained her submissive behavior in these past few weeks and also why she seemed so panicked and anxious. She'd found out that she was pregnant again, and while she wanted to leave my stepdad, she couldn't because she had no money. And on top of that, she was also pregnant by the time she was done telling me everything. She was in tears, and so was I. She told me that the morning after I'd run away, she'd suspected that I'd gone to my grandparents' place, and one call confirmed that she told her husband that she needed to go and apologize to me so that I come back, but he refused to let her go, saying that they were better off without me. Even yesterday, she told me that she'd lied to her husband, saying that she needed to go shopping for some groceries, that she needed to make dinner, and even that led him to scream at her for being callous before he finally let her go. She begged me to come back with her so that she would at least have someone she trusted in the house with her. Plus, yes, the money that my grandparents sent her would help. To her plan made no sense, but I could tell she just wanted a way out of this mess, which is why she was so nervous. I somehow managed to calm her down and get her to relax a bit before I told her that she could live here with my grandparents as well. Initially, she was extremely opposed to the idea of it and said that she couldn't possibly do that since she didn't want to be a burden. But after almost 15 minutes of trying to convince her that this was the best way forward, she agreed. I went downstairs and explained the whole situation to my grandparents, and to my amazement, it didn't take them even half a second to agree to the arrangement that I suggested. They didn't even need to think before they said yes, and that was that. It's been almost a day and my mother is still in a daze and has said nothing except for a very nervous and teary thank you to my grandparent. We're trying to find a good family lawyer who can file for divorce, and I'm hoping that this all turns out well. I feel terrible that my mother had to go through all of this by herself for the past few days, but now hopefully things will change for the better. Update 2 weeks have passed since the last update. My stepdad never bothered to find out where my grandparents lived, so while he's been harassing my mother and demanding that she come back non-stop by text and trying to call her every day, he wasn't able to find us. A few days ago, my grandparents finally found a reputable lawyer, and my mother filed for divorce. She almost didn't go through with it because she was afraid of the consequences, but after a lot of reassurance it was finally done. And then something really terrifying happened. I'm just glad that none of my loved ones were hurt. A day after my stepdad was served, he was somehow able to find where my grandparents lived and decided to pay us a visit. It was really late at night, and he rang the doorbell 4 or 5 times before I got up to open it. As soon as I opened the door, my stepdad grabbed me by the throat and pushed me back while cursing and yelling at me. He called me every derogatory word he knew and asked me where my mother was hiding and how dare she serve him with divorce papers when she'd been living on his money for the past few months. I was struggling to breathe and almost thought I was done for. But thankfully my grandpa came to the rescue in the nick of time and managed to knock him out with a vase. I let go, and as soon as my grandparents were sure that I was all right, they called the police. What happened next was all a blur, but he was arrested and he went with them quite willingly, but promised to make our lives hell for as long as he was around. My mother, thankfully, had fallen asleep by then and didn't witness any of this. She only learned about it the next day, and that led to another crying fit. My grandparents and I reassured her that everything was going to be fine, but she was still terrified. I'm guessing the pregnancy hormones, combined with the emotional distress of the divorce, is stressing her out. We're looking into therapists as well to help her out so that her mental state doesn't affect the baby, at least after what happened. My stepdad isn't going to be coming around for a while for sure. Update 3 months have passed since the last update and it's finally all good news. My mother is a divorced woman now and we're all thrilled for her. Her divorce was finalized a couple of days ago, and we also managed to get a restraining order against my ex-stepdad. Not just that my mother has single custody of her future child since her ex-husband has proved himself to be violent and incapable of being trusted with the child. He managed to avoid major prison time, but what he did still earned him almost a month, which really wasn't enough if you ask me. Anyway, my mother got almost everything in the divorce, including the house, the furniture, the car, and yes, she's going to get child support from my stepdad as well. So it all worked out in our favor. My mother and I have decided to sell the house and furniture and continue living with our grandparents, though she's trying to make up for everything that has happened in the past and build a better relationship with all of us now. So I'm happy about that. And she's also started helping out and running the bakery by putting her marketing major to use. I'm doing better than ever at school again, and things are finally looking up. My mother's almost 9 months pregnant now, and we're all extremely excited to meet the new baby. I'm finally okay.